And we are good to go. All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, my embraced family, and welcome to our weekly Wednesday discussion. Now, as most of you know, we actually finished a book that we've been going over for the past few months last week, titled The New Jim Crow, written by Michelle Alexander. And throughout those few months that we were discussing the book, we were educating ourselves on the history of systematic racial inequality in this country, how it still has an effect on our uh, communities of color today. And last week, we just kind of conclude with the discussion on what we can do to address some of these prevailing issues that still exist within our communities. The issues, of course, of systematic inequality and injustice. And I mentioned last week that we'll be starting a new book this week, which is titled Revolution by the Book by Imam Jamil-Al Amin. And this book, in a way, it's somewhat of a continuation of the ongoing theme that we have been uh, having throughout the past few months, the importance of community engagement and highlighting social inequality and racial inequality. But it kind of focuses on a more specific and focused aspect, and that is really kind of how to how to bring about change in your community from an Islamic perspective, in a way. This book was written in 1994 by Imam Jamil-Al Amin. And for those of you who don't know, we have been discussing Imam Jamil-Al Amin for quite a while now. We're actually embraced in doing a collaborative effort with CSJ, um, doing a campaign for the unjust incarceration of Imam Jamil-Al Amin. If you're not familiar with the name Jamil and Amin, you might be more familiar with the name H. Rap Brown, who was a civil rights leader back during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So before we go into the book today, I'm just going to have a brief overview of Imam Jamil and Amin, the purpose of this book, and then from there, we'll just highlight a couple points in the prologue and not really get into the chapter discussion until next week. That way, those of you who are not able to purchase the book will have time to do so. Now, where to get the book? So far, I haven't found any free PDFs online right now, so it seems the only way to get the book is to purchasing it off Amazon for about $7, $14, and from some sellers you can find it by around $7 on Amazon. But basically, we want to be able to give everyone a week to purchase the book. That way, everyone has time to kind of get what they need to get, and they'll be able to keep up with us. And a couple things. I know that a few of us were discussing throughout our last book review that the language used in the New Jim Crow was kind of hard to understand. It was using very complex language. It was very literature heavy, and it was kind of difficult for many of us to keep up. Right. So we heard you. So this book here is actually a very short, a pretty short book. It's not really that hard of a read, less than 200 pages, and the language used in this book is very straight to the point. It's very easy to understand. So it should be a much easier book for all of us to digest as a group, inshallah. So now to give a little bit of background information on this book. So as I mentioned before, this book was written by Imam Jamil-Al Amin, formerly known as H. Rap Brown, back in 1994. And in order for us to kind of really understand what this book is about, we first need to kind of just highlight a couple things about Imam Jamil-Al Amin. So, like I said before, he used to be known as H. Rap Brown. He was a civil rights advocate back in the 1960s. He was the chairman of the SNCC, the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. That particular organization should sound familiar because it's the same organization that Congressman Lewis was also a chairman of back during his time. So this is something that Imam Jamil-Al Amin has in common with Congressman Lewis, who of course was a very recognized and respected civil rights advocate who passed away, as we know, very recently, just a few months ago. And so Imam Jamil-Al Amin, back during his A. Brown days, was also part of this organization. Not quite at the same time, but he was the chairman of the SNCC. And we call the civil rights movement. One interesting thing that you notice is Imam Jamil and those who were kind of the more quote radical, even though the word radical is not really I don't think is a proper explanation. But kind of those who were more aggressive in their approach to how these issues need to be addressed, called the Black Power movement. And this is what Imam Jamil-Al Amin referred to as the Black Power movement. And basically, at one point, he actually became the Minister of Justice of the Black Panther Party. And those are very familiar with the Black Panther Party. They were a black rights movement back in the day that were considered radical by some. And on top of that, they were also on the FBI's most wanted list. And this also is kind of what led to A. Brown also being on the FBI's most wanted list. And I just kind of want to read you all a quote from A. Brown during his time serving with the Black Panthers, just to kind of highlight to you his mentality at that point and the types of, it kind of, which highlights the types of struggles and how much push within a corner that many in the Black community fell at this time. So I'm going to read that quote to you guys. It's here in the prologue. For those of you who have the book and want to follow along, you can find this quote in the prologue. So this is from A. Brown, where he says, "Violence is as American as cherry pie. This country has delivered an ultimatum to Black people. America says to Blacks, either fight to live or you will live to die. I say to America, freedom or death." So this was A. Brown's mentality at this time. It just kind of highlights the amount of tension there was between many in the Black community and those who were in power in the West. They felt they were in such a, and we kind of spoke about this in our last book discussion about just how tense things were during the Jim Crow era and how oppressed the Black community was in the Jim Crow era, that it caused people to have this type of mindset that the only way for them to get the rights that they deserved was to fight, right? But this type of language and other certain incidents, we really don't really have much time to go into. He ended up on the FBI's most wanted list, and he was eventually imprisoned. And during his imprisonment is where he discovered Islam, right? And he ended up actually converting to Islam in the early 1970s, 1971, if I remember correctly. And when he accepted Islam and saw what Islam had to offer, and saw Islam's answer to, injustice and to inequality and to, providing social justice, this really developed a huge transformation within him, right? And I think many of us who are also American Muslim converts can kind of understand that to some extent, right? Because for me, for example, before I was Muslim, I was a much different person. I even have friends who know me before I became Muslim, and they've told me before you were Muslim, yeah, you were a cool guy, but you just were a lot more pessimistic. You had a much more darker personality. You just had a much more, pessimistic view of the world. And I'm told by these friends of mine that ever since you became Muslim, though, you just become a different person. You become much more optimistic. You become much more generous. You just become overall a better version of who you were before. So many of us who are converts, I think, can understand the transformative power of Islam, right? And how it can just really change who you are. And so when Imam Jamil-Al Amin discovered Islam, this kind of completely transformed his perspective. And so, what I mean by that is he still recognized that there are serious, serious issues of racial inequality in his community, and the Black community needs to become empowered and given the rights that they deserve. But Islam just kind of helped change his vision and approach of how to address these issues in the community. And I kind of want to read you guys this quote from Jamil Amin after his conversion to Islam. So he says, the struggle is an ongoing process. Many times people mistakenly identify movement as struggle. Movement is only a phase of struggle. When the first slave rebelled against being a slave, he gave an alternative to slavery that has been built upon until now. That's struggle. And there have been many movements in the struggle: the abolitionist movement, the anti-slavery movement, the civil rights movement, and the free speech movement. It means they come, they serve a purpose, and they go out. We grew to understand that it was a vehicle that moved people from one level of understanding to another level. The civil rights movement had to go out. It's ridiculous. This was written in 1992. He said this in 1992 to try to relive it. But the struggle still goes on. The struggle still goes on. The mission of a believer in Islam is totally different from coexisting or being a part of the system. The prevailing morals are wrong. Their ethics are wrong. Modern Western philosophy has reduced man to food, clothing, shelter, and the sex drive, which means he doesn't have a spirit. In Islam, we're not talking about getting the poor to vote. We're not talking about empowering poor people with money. We're talking about overturning that whole thing, man. This is from the City Paper, January 12th, 1992. So from that quote, we kind of see a shift in Jamil Amin's vision and his goal. So before, of course, the fight, the struggle that he refers to was to become a part of the system. Transform the system to where it becomes accepting of others, becomes accepting of his people, of the Black community. Right, that was part of the goal, is to gain that equality within the system, within the society. But here in that quote, he's saying that Islam still calls for a movement of some sort, right? But it helped him change what that movement, understand what that movement should be. So instead of seeing a change within the system, Imam Jamil, through converting to Islam, this kind of helped him see that the system in itself needs to be transformed. The society in itself needs to be transformed in order to gain true freedom and true empowerment, so to speak. And in a nutshell, this is kind of what this book is about. Revolution by the Book is, while the mission, to a certain extent, for Imam Jamil when he wrote this book didn't change. He still was calling for a movement, a change within the society. The type of movement he called for did change. He saw that, in his view, the only true way to um, basically bring about the change that the Black community needs, Islam needed to be properly practiced and implemented in order to bring about this type of change that the civil rights advocates were calling for, essentially. And this book here, he kind of discusses through the core principles and tenets of Islam how that can be done. And a couple more interesting facts about Jamil Al Amin. So he actually helped transform his community in Atlanta, Georgia. Before he came in, this was a community that was full of drugs, full of crime, and just full of all these things that really just kind of brought the community down. But Imam Jamil, through implementing Islam, through bringing that understanding to the community, helped transform this community. It helped get rid of drugs from the community. It helped establish businesses. He created a masjid that became like a community center with a strong community of believers that just helped transform his community, right? And brought a lot of khair, a lot of goodness into that still has positive effects for that community today. And unfortunately, as most of you know, we've spoken about in various different talks, Jamil Amin is currently incarcerated. He was convicted for the murder of an officer back in 2002. So, and honestly, it really was kind of a bogus case, and there's someone else who actually confessed to the crime and has been continuing confessing to that crime to this day. Um, and Embrace has worked with CSJ and YM to kind of bring attention to this issue and try and call for a retrial. And the district that's responsible for the case did elect a new DA who's going to be getting sworn in January. So hopefully, inshallah, things work in that favor. But he's been unjustly incarcerated for the last 20 years. He's currently in a federal prison, even though he was convicted for a state crime. And I can go on and on about the issues with Imam's case, but that's for inshallah ta'ala. When we go through this book, we'll learn more and more about Imam Jamil, inshallah ta'ala, and what we can do to help out this case. But basically, this book, Revolution by the Book, written by Imam Jamil, kind of brings into a perspective on how Islam can bring about change, not only within the self, but to our entire community and society. And he does that through kind of highlighting, again, like I mentioned, the core principles of Islam. And so I think through this book, what we'll be able to learn is really what is it in our religion that we can implement, that we can understand in order to bring about change in our own community and society, right? And so this, inshallah ta'ala, should be a very good book. And again, like I mentioned, it's a very easy read. The language is very easy to understand. He doesn't use any over advanced vocabulary or anything of that nature, so all of us should have an easier time with it. I think that what inshallah ta'ala will do, just like with the Tuesday discussion, we'll probably go over 2 chapters a week. There's I think about 10 chapters overall within the book. Yes, 10 chapters. So that means we should be able to finish this book in about 5 weeks, which isn't long. And like I mentioned, currently the only way I could identify to get the book is through Amazon. It's on there for like $7, but I think also something like $14. If I can find a PDF, I will share it with all of you. But if I can't, you can also buy it on Amazon. And again, though, if you're not able to buy the book for whatever reasons, you don't have it within your budget or whatever, that's of course perfectly fine. Just like with our usual book discussions, I will start the halaqah with a overview of the chapters that we talk about. So even if you're not able to buy the book, you will still be able to learn and participate, inshallah. So next week, inshallah, is when we'll start the book officially. We'll go over the first 2 chapters, and we'll try to do 2 chapters a week from there, inshallah ta'ala. With that, I want to go ahead and end the live stream portion. For those of you who are tuning in through Facebook Live or through YouTube, again, the name of the book is Revolution by the Book by Jamil-Al Amin. You can find it on Amazon. Someone told me they found it for $7. I found it for $14. Try and purchase it. Join us every Wednesday, inshallah ta'ala, where we'll learn how exactly Islam has changed. So I think it should be a very good book, very good discussion, inshallah. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream portion, and then from there, we'll continue the discussion through the Zoom, inshallah. With that, I'll go ahead and end the live stream. اللهم سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.